April 29, 1944. Somewhere over occupied France. Nancy Wake sits in the belly of an RAF bomber, waiting for the green light. She's 31 years old, wearing a jumpsuit over her civilian clothes, a pistol strapped to her thigh. In moments, she parachutes into Nazi-occupied territory, one of the most dangerous operations in the war. The Gestapo has placed a 5 million franc bounty on her head, the highest reward for any Allied agent in France. They call her the White Mouse because she's slipped through their traps so many times they've lost count. They've tortured her friends trying to find her. They've executed her husband. And now she's voluntarily jumping back into their territory. The light turns green. Wake doesn't hesitate. She launches herself into the darkness. Her parachute catches on a tree. She dangles there, tangled in branches, as a French resistance fighter approaches. He looks up at her and says in French, "I hope that all the trees in France bear such beautiful fruit this year." Wake's response typical of her style. "Cut out that bullshit and get me out of this tree." Over the next 4 months, Nancy Wake will command 7,000 resistance fighters. She'll kill an SS guard with a karate chop to the neck. She'll cycle 500 kilometers through enemy territory in 72 hours. She'll lead a raid on Gestapo headquarters, and she helped liberate France from Nazi occupation. All while drinking her male colleagues under the table and never losing her sense of humor. This is the story of Nancy Wake, the party girl who became a spy, the socialite who became a guerrilla fighter, and a woman the Nazis feared more than almost anyone else in France. Section 1. From socialite to resistance fighter. To understand how Nancy Wake became the Gestapo's most wanted woman, you need to understand who she was before the war. And that story begins with a rebellious girl from New Zealand who refused to accept the limitations society placed on women. The runaway. Nancy Grace Augusta Wake was born on August 30th, 1912, in Wellington, New Zealand. Her family moved to Sydney, Australia when she was 2 years old, settling in North Sydney. Nancy was the youngest of 6 children. Her father was a journalist who eventually abandoned the family. Her mother was strict, religious, and determined that Nancy would become a proper lady, quiet, obedient, marriageable. Nancy was none of those things. At age 16, Nancy ran away from home. She'd saved £200 inherited from an aunt and decided to see the world. She worked briefly as a nurse, then used her inheritance to travel first to New York, then to London, where she trained as a journalist. By the 1930s, Nancy was working as a freelance journalist in Paris. She loved the city, the cafes, the culture, the freedom. She was beautiful, charming, and lived the glamorous expatriate life. In 1933, her editor sent her to Vienna to interview the new German chancellor, a man named Adolf Hitler. Witness to evil, what Nancy saw in Vienna changed her life. She witnessed Nazi gangs attacking Jewish people in the streets. She saw elderly men forced to scrub pavements with toothbrushes while crowds laughed. She saw women beaten for trying to protect their children. Nancy later wrote, "My hatred of the Nazis was very, very deep. What I saw in Vienna made me realize that Hitler and his followers had to be stopped, no matter the cost." She returned to Paris with a new purpose: oppose fascism by whatever means necessary. In 1939, Nancy married Henry Fiocca, a wealthy French industrialist. They settled in Marseille, where Nancy enjoyed the life of a socialite: parties, fine dining, expensive clothes. But when Germany invaded France in 1940, everything changed. The escape network. After France fell, the country was divided. Northern France was occupied directly by Germany. Southern France, including Marseille, became Vichy France, a puppet government that collaborated with the Nazis. Most wealthy French people accepted the new reality. Nancy Fiocca did not. She immediately began helping the resistance. At first, it was small things: hiding Allied soldiers who'd been shot down, providing false documents, passing messages between resistance cells. But Nancy quickly became involved in something much larger: the Pat O'Leary Escape Network, one of the most successful organizations helping Allied soldiers and refugees escape France. Nancy became a courier. Using her status as a wealthy Frenchwoman married to a prominent businessman, She traveled freely through checkpoints. German soldiers rarely suspected the beautiful woman in expensive clothes of being a spy. She'd smuggle messages, money, and supplies to resistance cells. She'd guide Allied airmen to safe houses. She'd help refugees escape across the Pyrenees into Spain. And she was extraordinarily good at it. The White Mouse, the Gestapo knew someone was running an escape network in Marseille. They called the mysterious courier the White Mouse because she kept slipping through their traps. They tapped her phone. They opened her mail. They followed her. But Nancy always seemed to know when they were watching. Her tactics were brilliant and often involved playing up stereotypes about women. She'd flirt with German guards. She'd act like a ditzy socialite who couldn't possibly be involved in anything serious. She'd smile, wink, and say, "Do you want to search me?" knowing that most soldiers were too flustered to actually do it. Once, she was stopped at a checkpoint carrying resistance documents hidden in her clothing. The German guard became suspicious. Nancy immediately started crying, claiming she was rushing to see her lover and her husband couldn't know. The embarrassed guard waved her through. "God, what a flirtatious little bastard I was," Nancy later laughed. Between 1940 and 1943, Nancy helped over 1,000 Allied soldiers and refugees escape France. But by late 1942, the Gestapo was closing in. The escape in November 1942, Germany occupied all of France. The Gestapo now had unrestricted access to Marseille. Nancy's network was compromised. Agents were being arrested and executed. Nancy knew she had to flee, but Henry refused to leave. He was French. This was his country. He'd stay and continue the fight. Nancy made 6 attempts to escape France. Each time she was caught or turned back. On her 4th attempt, she was arrested by the French milice collaborators, who were often more brutal than the Gestapo themselves. They tortured her for 4 days, trying to get her to reveal her network. Nancy gave them nothing but lies and insults. Finally, they let her go, not because they believed her, but because they couldn't prove anything. On her 6th attempt in 1943, Nancy finally succeeded. She crossed the Pyrenees on foot, a brutal mountain crossing in winter, and reached Spain, then Portugal, then Gibraltar, then finally England. She was safe, but she'd left Henry behind. In 1943, the Gestapo arrested Henry Fiocca. They tortured him, trying to learn Nancy's whereabouts. Henry told them nothing. They executed him anyway. Nancy wouldn't learn of her husband's death until after the war ended. Section 2. Training to Kill. When Nancy Wake arrived in England in 1943, she immediately tried to join the Free French forces. She wanted to go back to France. She wanted revenge for everything the Nazis had done. The Free French rejected her. They didn't trust her. Why had the Gestapo released her after 4 days of torture? Was she a double agent? Frustrated and angry, Nancy tried the British Special Operations Executive, the SOE, a secret organization that Churchill had created with the order. Set Europe ablaze. The SOE's mission was to conduct sabotage and organize resistance behind enemy lines. And they trained women agents, something unusual for the time. The interview with OSO Commander Morris Buckmaster went well. Nancy was accepted for training. The making of an agent so training was brutal. Nancy trained alongside men, and the instructors made no allowances for gender. They expected every agent, male or female, to be capable of the same things: killing, sabotage, survival. Nancy learned silent killing techniques, how to kill a man with her bare hands, explosives and demolition, Morse code and radio operation, parachute jumping, including nighttime jumps, weapons training, Sten guns, rifles, pistols, grenade survival skills, and evasion tactics. One of Nancy's instructors later wrote in her evaluation, "A very good and fast shot, cool and resourceful, extremely independent spirit. Doesn't take orders well, but will be very effective in the field." That last part, not taking orders well, would be both Nancy's greatest strength and her biggest challenge. She also learned to parachute. In April 1944, Nancy completed her parachute training just as the SOE was preparing for Operation Overlord D-Day. They needed agents in France to organize the resistance ahead of the invasion. Nancy volunteered immediately. April 29, 1944. The jump. Nancy was assigned to Team Freelance, a three-person SO unit. The team leader was Captain John Hein Farmer, codename Hubert. The radio operator was Dennis Rake. Nancy's codename was Helene. Their mission: parachute into the Auvergne region of central France, link up with local Maquis resistance groups, and prepare them for D-Day by organizing supply drops, training fighters, and conducting sabotage operations. On the night of April 29th to 30th, 1944, Nancy sat in an RAF Halifax bomber as it flew over France. When the light turned green, she jumped. Her parachute caught in a tree. Henry Tardivat, the local Maquis leader, found her dangling there. His gallant comment about beautiful fruit was met with Nancy's characteristically blunt response: "Cut out the bullshit and get me out of this tree." Tardivat would later say, "She is the most feminine woman I know until the fighting starts. Then she is like 5 men." Team Freelance was linking up with Colonel Emile Culloden, codenamed Gaspard, who commanded about 3,000 Maquis fighters in the Auvergne region. At first, Gaspard was skeptical. The SO had sent him a woman to command men? This wouldn't work. Nancy proved him wrong within days. Section 3. The White Mouse at War. Nancy. Wake's role in France was ostensibly to serve as liaison between the SOE in London and the local Maquis groups. She was supposed to organize supply drops and pass along instructions. Nancy did all that. But she also did much more. The leader, Nancy quickly established herself as the real power in Team Freelance. Captain Farmer was officially in charge, but Nancy had the personality, the experience, and the courage that made men follow her. She organized parachute drops of weapons and supplies nearly every other night. Massive containers of rifles, Sten guns, explosives, ammunition, and money would float down from British planes. Nancy made sure they were distributed fairly among the various Maquis groups. She also discovered she had a talent for commanding men in combat. When Maquis groups got into firefights with German patrols, Nancy would often take tactical control directing suppressive fire, organizing ambush, ensuring wounded men got evacuated. The Maquis fighters, rural Frenchmen who'd never seen a female soldier, were initially skeptical. But Nancy won them over through a combination of competence, courage, and her ability to drink them under the table. One Maquis fighter later said, "Helen could drink brandy like water and fight like 5 men. We would follow her anywhere," the bicycle ride. In June 1944, disaster struck. The Germans launched a massive attack on the Maquis camps with overwhelming force, thousands of troops, tanks, artillery, and aircraft. The Maquis fought bravely, but were outnumbered. They had to scatter and retreat to avoid annihilation. 7 Maquis fighters were killed. But worse than the casualties was this. During the battle, Dennis Rake's radio was destroyed. Team Freelance had no way to contact London, no way to request new supplies, no way to coordinate with SOE headquarters. Nancy made a decision that her colleagues thought was insane. She would cycle to another resistance group's radio station and send messages from there. The problem? The nearest functioning radio was 500 kilometers away, over 300 miles. Nancy set out on a bicycle with just a small bag of supplies. She cycled for 3 days and 3 nights through German-occupied territory, evading patrols, bluffing her way through checkpoints. After covering 500 kilometers, her legs so swollen she could barely walk, Nancy reached the radio station, sent her messages, and cycled back. The journey took just over 72 hours. When she returned, her colleagues couldn't believe she was still alive. "What's the big deal?" Nancy shrugged. "It was just a bicycle ride. The Gestapo raid." Nancy's most famous combat action came during a raid on a German military factory. The Maquis had received intelligence about a factory producing weapons for the Wehrmacht. Nancy planned and led the assault personally. The raid was going well until a German SS guard spotted them and turned to sound the alarm. If he alerted the garrison, the entire Maquis unit would be trapped. Nancy was closest to the guard. She didn't have time to draw her weapon. So she did what SO training had prepared her for. She killed him with her bare hands. Nancy later described it matter-of-factly. "I chopped him in the throat. He went down." I moved on. When asked if she regretted killing the man, Nancy's response was typically blunt. "Regret? Are you kidding? He was trying to kill us. The only thing I regret is that I didn't get to kill more Nazis." The Battle of Montmouchet. In June 1944, the Germans launched another major offensive against the Maquis. This time, they committed significant forces, over 22,000 Wehrmacht troops with armor and air support against the approximately 7,000 Maquis fighters Nancy's group had organized. The Battle of Montmouchet lasted several days. Nancy directed artillery fire, using weapons dropped by the SOE, organized ambushes, and personally led counterattacks. When a unit of Maquis fighters was pinned down by German machine gun fire, Nancy grabbed a Sten gun and led the charge herself, providing covering fire while the men retreated. The battle was technically a German victory. The Maquis couldn't hold against such overwhelming force and had to withdraw. But the Germans suffered heavy casualties, approximately 1,400 German soldiers killed versus 100 Maquis dead. Nancy had proven that properly supplied and organized resistance fighters could take on regular Wehrmacht troops and inflict significant casualties. Leading the liberation. As Allied forces swept across France following D-Day, the Maquis groups Nancy had organized attacked German supply lines, ambushed retreating units, and liberated towns ahead of the advancing Allies. On August 26, 1944, Paris was liberated. Nancy Wake, the woman who'd fled France in 1943 as a hunted fugitive, rode into Paris at the head of her Maquis forces, a conquering hero. She'd helped kill or wound thousands of German soldiers. She'd organized one of the most effective resistance groups in France, and the Gestapo had never caught her. The White Mouse had won. Section 4. After the war, when the war ended, Nancy Wake was one of the Allies' most decorated service members. She received the George Medal, UK, the 1939 to 1945 Star, UK, the France and Germany Star, UK, the Defense Medal, UK, the War Medal 1939 to 1945, UK, the Freedom Medal, US, the Médaille de la Résistance, France, the Croix de Guerre with 2 palms, France, the Legion d'Honneur, France. More medals than almost any other female Allied agent. But what Nancy really wanted was to find Henry, learning the truth. After returning to France, Nancy searched for her husband. She checked hospitals, refugee centers, prisoner lists. Finally, someone told her the truth. Henry Fiocca had been arrested by the Gestapo in 1943, tortured for information about Nancy, and executed when he refused to talk. Nancy later said, "Henry's death was my fault. He died because of me." That's something I've had to live with every day since. She never forgave herself. And she never forgave the Nazis. The post-war years, Nancy tried to return to normal life. She returned to Australia in 1949. She ran for parliament and lost. She tried various jobs but couldn't settle into civilian life. In 1957, she married John Forward, a former RAF pilot she'd known during the war. They settled in Australia, but Nancy struggled with alcoholism and depression, what we'd now recognize as PTSD. She sold her medals to pay for living expenses, saying, "There was no point in keeping them. I'll probably go to hell, and they'd melt anyway." But Nancy also refused to be forgotten. She wrote her autobiography, The White Mouse, published in 1985. She gave interviews. She appeared in documentaries. She made sure people knew what the resistance had accomplished. And she kept her sense of humor. When asked about killing the SS guard with her bare hands, she said, "They taught us this judo chop method at SOA, and I practiced it on men. Well, one night I had the opportunity to use it in real life. It felt quite natural, really, the final years." After her second husband died in 1997, Nancy returned to London. She lived at the Stafford Hotel in Piccadilly, a former Allied Forces club during the war, where she spent her mornings at the bar, sipping gin and tonic and regaling guests with war stories. The hotel welcomed her. The staff adored her. Tourists would seek her out just to meet the legendary White Mouse. Nancy Wake died on August 7, 2011. at age 98. Her last request was that her ashes be scattered in the hills near Montlucan, where she'd fought with the Maquis. At her memorial service, one former resistance fighter said, "Helene was the bravest person I ever knew, man or woman. She never hesitated. She never quit. And she never, ever stopped fighting." Nancy Wake's story is extraordinary, but what makes it even more remarkable is how typical she was of the women who served in SOE. Over 39 women were sent into occupied France as SEO agents. They organized resistance networks. They conducted sabotage, they killed enemy soldiers, and many of them were captured, tortured, and executed. Names like Odette Sansom, Violette Chabot, and Noor Inayat Khan, women who showed the same courage as Nancy but weren't as lucky. Nancy survived because she was skilled, but also because she was lucky. She knew that. She never claimed to be braver than the women who died. She just happened to make it home. But she also represented something important, proof that women could fight just as effectively as men. That courage has no gender. That when the stakes are high enough, anyone, male or female, trained soldier or civilian, can become a warrior. The Gestapo learned that lesson the hard way when they tried to catch the white mouse and failed again and again and again.